And hello again for Thursday. World news, let's go. This opening one. Doug Short, my favourite chart man, comes up with the GDP and against CPI and the deflator and all that's all done in lovely charts. So I've got to show you, haven't I? So this is the real GDP with the GDP deflator as they put it out, and as you can see it's quite nicely green at the end. We're doing all very nicely. Well, 1.3, it's not that clever. Okay, the next one is with the CPI being used as the deflator, and as you can see it's minus 3.2. It isn't so clever. Now I don't see where he got that from, but the chances of Dougie Short being wrong on his charts are very slim. So, but you can see that that is what I was trying to get at, but I didn't actually find that things would be going negative now, but that's what Dougie's found. Now this next one, I believe what Doug's using is, he calls it the alternative CPI. Most of you probably know who John Williams at Shadow Stats is. So let's say he's using John Williams's inflation indicators. In other words, the old ones that they used to use before they started jiggering around with them. Okay, so this is now the same information, but with that alternative CPI, the old way that they used to work out inflation. Now, because the chart looks a bit, when I do it in full, I just wanted to show you the early part of this chart to start with, and this is the 60s, 70s and 80s. And as you can see, using the alternate CPI inflation measure, it looks about right. There's plenty of upness there on the green, and the reds are coming down in the right places. There's a little bit of bleed down in the 60s. There's a little blip down, but that wouldn't cause a recession, so it's not a recession. But the grey bars are the recessions, and the reds are coming down in the right place. The end of the 70s and 80s was a double dip recession and a very bad recession, so that looks about right. And the 91s, there was a bit of coming down before the actual recession in 91. So it doesn't look too bad. Now, again, I'm not quite getting to the chart yet, but Doug's written below it so he doesn't get labelled a wacko. I find this alternate real GDP to be interesting in a freakish sort of way, but I personally see no credibility in the hyper-negative GDP it produces, and this is what it produces, like a poster from a horror film. The one I did before, you can see going back to the 60s, 70s and 80s, was that left hand half, and it's perfectly reasonable. And it just so happens that after the 90s it turns into an absolute horror show. Now they're using the same information all across that, all the way back to the 60s. It just is a horror show since the 90s. I think that is a bit interesting. Yeah, moving on. Last little look. Oh, he's behind you. Moving on. David K. Johnson, fact-free fiscal farce. I really only put this in because I like the headline. The actual article is an absolute piece of crap. But it was about, obviously, the US and their debt ceiling thing, which is... I'd say it annoyed me, but it hasn't really. I've just ignored it because it's just all so silly. But I just wanted to use this as a little occasion to talk about the cartoon of last night and the way money finds itself into existence. And I think most people were probably starting to get it from what the little cartoon bears were saying to each other, or whatever creatures they were. The thing is, where does money come from? Now, the way of explaining it is horizontal money, which is bank-created money. It lends out for a mortgage or for a car or whatever, and as it's paid back, it disappears again. It's lent out from thin air, and as it comes in back into the bank, it just goes to where it came from. It just disappears. It's out and back again. And the interest paid back in is what the bank runs itself on, in a very simple way of putting it. The other is vertical money supply, which comes from the government. And here, I think the best in for this, for the people that aren't understanding it, is that are saying, why is the American government borrowing? And the thing is, the American government is not borrowing. It's just providing a savings facility. It's just a place where people can, they've got these paper bits of money or representation tokens on the computer of bits of money that don't earn interest, so they can give them to the government and earn interest on it. It's a savings facility. So the question is that the boy bear was asked, where do you get your money from, by the girl bear, and he says, I earned it. And where did where did the people that gave it to you get it from? They earned it. And it comes back to, where does all this money come from? Some people have said, well, they borrow it from China, and you go, oh dear. But what are they borrowing? They're borrowing in dollars. Where did China get the dollars from? They got them from the American people for buying cheap Chinese shit. Yeah? And where did the American people get the dollars from? There is only one fountain of dollars, and that is the US government. Except where a fountain is based on some factual and finite substance, the dollars aren't a factual finite substance. They're just, you just key them in. All you need is one computer and go 0, 0, or 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, and they can just keep doing it. And that is all they do. And that is the vertical money supply. And what normally happens is the amount of money supply that's paid out is normally taxed back in. That's a balanced budget. And if there's a deficit, there's a swatch of money that's left out in the economy. But a country like the United States that runs such an import-export imbalance, a lot of those dollars go out of America. So what? Most of them come back in. There is a problem with inflation if they do it too much, but that's something that they've got to deal with, as long as they know what system they're working with. And let's hope they do. Let's get on to selling Italy and buying UK. This is, if we read down at the bottom, that's a modern record low for the 10-year gilt yield. Gilts are what United Kingdom bonds are called, gilts. And a record Eurozone high for its Italian peer. Outwardly, it's an amazing gulf in some respects, as both sovereigns are doomed to low growth. The bond market, it's huge, and it's got quite a lot of bright people in it. Italy, when you've got bonds, you've got, when you're thinking about the negative aspects, you've got a default possibility and an inflation possibility. Right? Basically, that's otherwise, to balance off your coupon, that's just about what you're taking into account. With the UK, there is no default possibility at all, just like the United States. None at all. No default possibility. Unless something like Russia or something really wacky happens and they default. They never have to default because they can just go 1, 0, 1, 0. No default possibility. There's an inflation possibility, but obviously because the gilt coupon interest rate's really low, they don't think there's much of an inflation possibility either there. So gilts are very high in price, low in yield at the moment. Italy, there is a default, a very large default possibility, and you can forget the inflation aspect of it, but there is a very large default possibility because they do not have the 1, 0, 1, 0. They do not have that capability. So there is a chance of default, and that's what's going on. But we can see from this that Italians do have something, a bit of class. Style. Panache. This is the Ministero dell'Economia e della Finanza. And this is their calendar for selling their bonds. Nice, isn't it? That's August, and this next one is for September. A touch of class. And all those little triangles and whatever are the selling dates for the amount of bonds that they've got to get rid of, and they've got an awful lot to get to sell in August and September, and the interest rate is going up and up. A guilty inflation record. Yields on 10-year gilts, we know what they are, fell to below 2.77 on Tuesday, the lowest level for about 50 years. However, real yields are at their historic lows, with gilts yielding 2.2% less than inflation. You buy a gilt, this 10-year bond, you buy it, the 10-year, and at the end of that year, if inflation stays as it is now, you have lost 2.2% of your buying power. But you have guaranteed that you have no default risk at all. Ireland's business blog with Lisa O'Carroll. Nothing particularly from this. I just didn't want to forget Ireland. There's been many articles that I've had on a tab that never really got in to talk about Ireland, because I don't want them to be forgotten, that countries like Ireland, Greece, Portugal and Spain with its unemployment, and Italy's got its problems, that there are countries out there that have got terrible, terrible problems from this economic catastrophe. And one of the best go-tos, if you don't want to read the heavy-hitting blogs on Ireland and places, this in The Guardian, she obviously really cares for Ireland. Ireland in crisis, 1 in 4 have part-time jobs only. The Irish domestic economy shows no sign of growth. Some 300,000 people have seen their income drop by 50%, and 25% have part-time jobs only. How can the country ever recover? Don't forget them. They're in a very bad way over there. And how they're going to recover? If the world economy really boomed, they would stand a chance, but it doesn't look like it's going to, so heaven knows what's going to happen there. Finishing with the Financial Times and Willem Buiter, blundering towards a you break it and you own it Europe. I was going to do the entire one of this world news just on this one particular article, so if you want to go and read it, I was that interested in it. He starts off with the latest instalment of the drama, that is the Eurozone periphery sovereign debt crisis, and European-wide banking sector crisis demonstrates that fiscal federalism is not going to happen. And there's just so much written in between the lines of this article. It's very interesting. He was always one of my favourite go-to people before he went over to work for Citi in New York, and has been talking quite a lot of tripe lately. But every now and then he comes back and tells it how it is. But you've got to work out what he's saying by reading between the lines here. But he's quite clear in that opening paragraph that in his opinion fiscal federalism is not going to happen, and that's the tipping point thing. The Eurozone breaks up, or it goes into fiscal federalism. His vote is for the European money-using zone will break up. He finishes with, so the EU and the Euro area blunder higgledy-piggledy into a future that fits its unique nature as neither a nation-state nor an intergovernmental arrangement, but something with features of both. It won't be pretty, but it will work, after a fashion, and it can survive, which is part of his talking blithering bollocks, because that's just to make people happy, and for people not to think that he's just a pessimistic loon as well, because what he's actually written in the article shows it absolutely and totally cannot work. That's another one gone. See you tomorrow. Bye.